Craig and me, 16 of the past 17 national champions in college football have come from inside of that circle. Now, I was like looking around, like, oh, okay, where are the other circles? Like, see, because Mississippi doesn't need to be in this circle, but then it wouldn't be a circle.
Yeah.
They just happen to be on the right side of the Gulf Coast.
They're the losers of the circle.
Yeah, no, they
quite
are.
frankly.
They're,
I mean,
some
they're
of the
the
reasons
only ones not holding up their weight.
They Mississippi State with Dak had that run. They got the number one, I think, at one point. That didn't last long, and we know Ole Miss has been in and out the last couple of years with Kiffin. But 16 of the last 17 national champions have been from the state of Louisiana, LSU, the state of Georgia, Georgia, the state of Florida, Florida State,
And Florida.
Alabama, and would have gone back to Florida, Alabama, and Auburn. And then South Carolina is on the very right top tip with Clemson.
Yeah. It's
not even you can't. Never mind. Sorry.
Yeah.
Didn't see one of the logos at first.
Yeah. I mean, that's where, I think the angriest Butch Henry, our late co-host, ever got at me was I kind of brought this up one time when he was telling me about that the best talent in high school football is in Texas. And I said, okay, if that's the case, then where are all the trophies? The best talent in high school football is in three places. It's in Texas, Florida, and California. And I think era to era, those probably vary. But we're in an era right now that is now about 35 years long, if you really go back to it, maybe even longer.
Since the early 80s. Since Miami
the early 80s.
And Florida State started to run the table.
Yeah, where the Southeast there, that Louisiana, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, and now South Carolina, that's where the majority of the talent's sitting. And that's where people are winning. Now, look, they get people from all over the place, right? But the majority of the talent that goes to state schools is from those states. And that's where they're dominating. And the ebb and flow, I think the true ebb and flow in the whole region is, where does Atlanta and Miami go? Like, where do the most of the best players in those two spots go? And when Miami had it, right, Miami was the best. When Florida State had it, Florida State was the best. Alabama and Georgia have it right now, and guess who's the best? When
and
Florida
Clemson
had
right
it,
next to them,
Clemson was going down into Florida and getting players, and they were really doing well in Atlanta. So that's where it's been, and that's where it's moved. LSU is the most interesting one to me because they're the one who's most easily able to grab out of Florida and Texas at the same time because of being kind of in the middle there. In Atlanta, too. But
they don't really grab a lot out of Texas, though. Yeah. They really don't. I mean, they get guys from time to time, but you'd be surprised. LSU does not dip into Texas nearly as often as you would think that they do.
Texas dips into Louisiana, yeah.
No, Texas definitely grabs A&M and UT, and add in Baylor, add in Texas Tech, because I'm sure now with that staff they'll be in Louisiana a lot more now, because when they were around in Waco they always got like a Henry Black or someone like that. But yeah, I think that. It's weird how that works out where LSU really there'll be some guys, don't get me wrong, but they are not relying on Texas at all. Mm-hmm. But, yeah, I mean, I just pulled up. I was trying to find a more updated, look at, like, sort of the blue chip ratio for schools, and maybe I got one here. But, yeah, there's different breakdowns. Like, it depends on the site you want to go to. But, for example, I think On3's got one from 2022. Of course, there's some, like, formula to it. But Florida, number 1, Texas, number 2, California, number 3. And they're doing this by, like, the share of blue chips. Georgia, 4, Louisiana, number 5. And used to, you wouldn't have Louisiana in there. Georgia, though, and Louisiana are always ones that you would argue. There were always arguments for why they should be higher, and they probably weren't getting enough credit. But I think the SEC's success has now shown that spotlight on both Louisiana and Georgia to now where they are mentioned more regularly like they should be. But forever and ever, it was just Texas, Florida, California. I'll tell you, the state that used to get mentioned but dropped down is Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. That used to be a state that a lot of people mention. But, yeah, I mean, Alabama's got a surprisingly good number of blue-chip athletes for a state that you wouldn't necessarily think just – size-wise has a ton. They've got a ton. Alabama and Auburn are able to feast in-state. They're able to dip in a little bit of Mississippi, but Yeah, I mean, the whole Southeast region, just no matter where you look, north, south, east, or west, you're probably bumping into a top 5 state talent production-wise. And so, I'm sure that plays into it. I think just the passion, I guess is the right word, in that part of the country compared to other places is pretty much unmatched at this point as well when it comes to college football, like as a whole, as a group. Yeah, there's definitely some shifting that's gone on, but I do think a lot of it's just Louisiana and Georgia getting their proper just due and bumping up a little bit above, former states like or former, places like Pennsylvania.
LSU had 7 players from Texas on their roster last year, like 100 players or whatever it was. 7 of them from the state of Texas. I bet there are rosters in the state of Texas where they have 7 players from Louisiana.
And what's been their thing is they mostly have defensive players. That's what their deal has been. They, I don't know what it is this year. I haven't looked this year, but I know in years past, doing the Earl Campbell Award, I'm looking for offensive players. There's been like nobody on that. You know who it was? The backup running back, Josh. Gosh, what was his last name? I forget off the top of my head, but their running back is from Texas. And I was like, oh, wow, that's the first time I've been able to put an LSU guy on there in like 6 years because they haven't had anybody offensive-wise, maybe on the line, but skill guy-wise, they haven't had any big names because their guys come from Louisiana or they come from Florida or they come from, Georgia, all the places that we just mentioned. There's a ton of talent in that Southeast area, and I think that helps explain why we are in this period where we are, where schools all in that area, even with national recruiting, are feasting on that pool of talent.
There's a ton of talent in Georgia. I mean, that's like if you look for bang for your buck.
Josh Williams is who I'm thinking of.
Bang for your buck, Louisiana might be better than anybody as far as the
pound
state.
For pound.
The pound for pound, bang for your buck, population and elite players or high-level players. Yeah, Pennsylvania and Ohio used to be a part of the conversation, and they still are. But the South, what happened in Florida is everybody used to leave Florida to go play for everybody else. And then, wow, here comes Miami, the U, Florida State, Bobby Bowden. Florida was kind of like in a wasteland for the longest time, and then now they keep their own. That doesn't mean you don't go in there and pick and choose some players like Ohio State does or Alabama does or Texas does or Oklahoma or even Baylor. But they locked down their state, which I think used to be kind of like the border.
Yeah.
That people were coming through it all the time.
Georgia has become the problem for the 3 big schools in Florida because they Alabama too, because they can go in there and say like, well, we're not that far. I mean, it's right here.
Most of North Florida grew up Braves and Falcons fans.
Exactly. So if you are from one of those, though, like Jacksonville was a great talent area. Like Jacksonville's very disputed territory. That's where they have the game between Florida and Georgia. So who's ever going to lean? It's pretty interesting. I do think there was an era where Texas probably kind of dominated that as far as what was going on, but it moves and shifts and depends on what people do.
Texas still has as much talent as they've ever had before. The difference is, to me, is a lot of the schools in the South have caught up, not maybe in overall numbers, but bang for your buck. Florida has increased it dramatically, and Texas still has a ton of players because there's so many schools and it's a big state. But, man, those other states have really done a great job of getting better, facilities better, coaching better, and talent better.
Yeah, and I also think there's probably something to do with the movement of people. I mean, Ohio used to be up in that top 5-ish, and they're in like top 15-ish now. Pennsylvania, like I mentioned, was probably top 4 at one point, top 5. They're probably top 10-ish now, whereas they're getting replaced by, Louisiana and places like that. So, yeah, it makes sense given where the titles are coming from. You just look in that area, look at the talent ratios, and it's all there to comprehend and make sense.
When we come back, Mac.